Welcome adventurers to the steam-powered Mortal Realms. My name is Doug with 2+ Tough, and in this video, we're going to be talking all about the Kharadron Overlords within the context of Soulbound, the Age of Sigmar role-playing game. If you are new to the channel, first of all, welcome. The way these videos work is I'm going to break down the lore of this faction, what makes them unique and their motivations and all these kinds of things. Then we'll transition to talking about the actual archetypes or classes that you can play in Soulbound, the role-playing game. And then we'll kind of round out the discussion by discussing what makes them unique, what they add to any kind of party that they're a part of, and then review a pre-generated character that the good folks over at Cubicle 7 have created for us to kind of give some context to those concepts. So, without further ado, we're going to dive into the lore. I'm going to be throwing up some fun artwork for you to get you excited for the faction, and so you don't have to stare at this mug the entire time. So let's dive in with the simple question: who are the Kharadron Overlords? Well, the Kharadron Overlords are an extremely unique take on the classic dwarven trope. In fact, the trope of being a deep, underground miner and engineer society is how these dwarves, or dwarden to use the Games Workshop terms, started out. You see, way back in the Age of Myth, they were living in Chaman, the realm of metal, mining deep into the earth for precious gems and minerals, while on the surface, their engineers and inventors were having a bit of a renaissance, designing all manner of contraptions and even some crude flying machines. These aircraft were made possible thanks to the discovery of a strange resource called ether gold. To briefly explain ether gold, imagine if we discovered something like fossil fuels in our clouds here on Earth, but they were also like the gaseous state of a precious metal. So they run in sky veins, if you will, long, connected strands, just like a lot of mineral rock does here on Earth, and when used correctly and tempered, it can become a solid and used to power these immense machines with ease. And that's important because ether gold is a part of Kharadron Overlord society. It is the defining feature of their culture. Everything is about accruing this because it's what keeps them in flight, it's their currency, it's their safety net, everything. Now, the uses for this new technology and power source were just being discovered when the Age of Chaos began. Tzeentch, the Lord of Change and Chaos God of magic and secrets and transmutation, had his greedy eyes set on Chaman. And so when he burst into the realm, he did so with an intensity that shook every tribe and clan and people to the core. Many of these classic dwarven holds opted to stand and fight, but all of them were wiped out. No matter how deep you dug into the earth, or how tall your towers and walls were, the overwhelming power and demonic forces with witchfire and corruption, it just could not be stopped. So the story of the Kharadron Overlords begins in this moment of utter devastation, because some of these Duarden, to use the GW term again, looked and really saw what was happening, right? That no amount of fortifications were helping. And so they were looking for some other means of escape. And so for many of them, instead of digging deeper into the ground, they raced to their newly developed and experimental flying machines to get away from what was happening. And when these airships all began to rise up, because again, there were very few in production, they were essentially scattered refugees of the Duarden in Chaman, and they locked their ships together and tried to make survival a priority. Together they rose up to the clouds, far above the annihilation of what was happening below, and while they were among all the ether gold they could ever hope to have, meaning, the resource they need to stay aloft and stay safe, the next challenge would be to cement them as a united people. Okay, so we have all the engines we need. We're technically safe because we're far away from what's going on all the way down below us, but how do we turn this into a society? Basically, these Duarden, who now, there's a lot of ships kind of lumped together, you have enough for maybe a small town or community. Well, they all started to argue amongst each other on how to expand, right? How to use their limited resources, who gets to mine which ether gold veins. And so, in order to kind of stave off these ragged survivors from turning on one another, the Code was born. The Code is a document that nearly every Kharadron Overlord subscribes to. It is both a legal document, sorting out how they can claim ether gold veins, own property, laws of governance, that kind of thing, but it's also a document of their ethical code. It formats all their interactions in the context of deals and exchanges, sales and commerce. Because these survivors that had nothing needed to think in this way of give and take to work together, right? And that's how their society rebuilt itself, was just exchanges and favors, and eventually it built itself into a full society. Now, I did a full video on the origins of the KO and the Code and all that kind of stuff, and I'll put that in the description down below for you to check out. I'm going to warn you, they're a little bit older, the audio is a little bit off, I need to redo them someday, but they are extremely interesting as a faction. Quite honestly, one of my favorites when it comes to their lore. But from those humble beginnings, this race exploded in size, right? They would send salvagers down with some of their ships down into the realms to harvest raw materials, bring it back up, and build out their society, building bigger engines, needing more ether gold, and it just kind of blossomed from there. Eventually turning this ragtag bunch of small airships, kind of all lashed together, into a mind-blowingly huge floating city structure called skyports. Each with their own skyscrapers and, docks and everything within them. Entire floating cities. The Kharadron Overlords are a people who believe in science, innovation, technology, and personal merit. Everything they do is measured by how much wealth they can accrue and bargains that they make. And really what they add to the greater society. So again, they started off with us fighting over all these different resources we need to accrue. How are we going to manage ourselves and lead and govern and all kind of stuff as these survivors who are now in an environment that none of them are used to. And so they built this system out of nothing. And so it's a really incredible story. But individually, everything is measured around how do you contribute to the whole, right? How do you get ether gold to keep literally our cities afloat? But then also how do you, bring in profit, and how do you contribute with trade and food and drink and all these things? So even though they hid in the sky during the Age of Chaos, when Sigmar began building cities in the realms during the Age of Sigmar, where we currently are, these Duarden smelled the potential for profit. And again, that's the goal, and have firmly entrenched themselves into the greater order societies. And, Kharadron Overlords, they'll hire themselves out as a few things, right? They'll show transportation from one place to another with their sky ships. They can facilitate trade and even smuggling operations. They can go hunting over massive distances because of their, ability to move so quickly and easily. And as for someone, with this worldview on why they would become soulbound, the answer is their same as, motivation for literally anything else they do, which is profit and pragmatism. If there's a goal, a treasure, or a quest that will see their fortunes increase, they'll take it. And you might say to yourself, but Doug, I hear you say, I thought that the soulbound had to leave everything behind. And that's true, but there's still money to be made. If a Kharadron Overlord leaves their home to become soulbound, they may venture out and find new ether gold veins or technologies that they can sell back to their people at home. They may connect trade routes, farm rare and exotic materials, or clear out enemies that encroach upon the profitability of their peers. But of course, all of that comes at a price, for sure. Again, I can't emphasize enough, their worldview is centered around bargaining, haggling, working together to get the best deal, but also in that deal contribute to what is essentially the greater good of their society. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can be very altruistic, or it can be very selfish and greedy looking. Now, like I said, this is a very abbreviated synopsis. This is an incredibly deep and interesting faction, and that description in the playlist, that playlist is in the description down below. But for now, I want to transition into talking about the specific Kharadron Overlord archetypes, or classes if you play other role-playing games, that you can be in Soulbound, the role-playing game. Kicking it off with the Ether Chemist. So we start by looking at one of the most vital members of Kharadron Overlord society. As we mentioned earlier, the KO, as I call them, are a faction all centered around this resource known as Ether Gold. And it's actually the Ether Chemist that are experts in locating and harvesting this resource from the sky. So they're part mineralogist, meteorologist, prospector, and engineer. And I make a point to say engineer because for those of the Ether Chemist Guild, meaning the academies that produce these kinds of things, the renowned and profitability doesn't come from just finding ether gold veins in the sky, but inventing new technologies with which to harvest them. So in our world, it would be like, we find a new patch of fossil fuels, and we have experts who study it, and not only how to get it, but extract it right from the earth and monetize it. And then we have those equally hardworking crews who go in and actually do the mining. Well, the earlier part is where the Ether Chemist fits in. He's the brain behind the operation, and then your average Kharadron Overlord, known as an Arcanaut company, acts as the miner. Now, these characters will often become soulbound for practical reasons mentioned before, right? They get to travel the realms, they get to see new veins of ether gold, gain access to new esoteric knowledge with their binding, which they can hopefully use to create new equipment for the extractions that we talked about before. Again, personal fame, glory, and profitability. Next up are the Endrin Masters, and these are the technological wizards of the KO fleets. See, where the Ether Chemists are all about the resource of ether gold, the Endrin Masters are all about the raw technology that make the Kharadron Overlords what they are, right? The ships and the engines and the turbines and the weapons and so on. These are by far the most mechanically inclined of the Kharadron Overlords, but these are not just like nerds who tinker in workshops or slave over blueprints or anything. These are action heroes who throw themselves into the fray to keep these ships flying mid-battle, right? Cannons firing at their maximum efficiency and so on. Now, if you want an example of what an Endrin Master is like in action, right? Imagine you're on a fishing ship and all of a sudden you're in this bad storm and you spring a leak. Rather than being some book nerd who's just going to pore over blueprints to figure out how bad the leak might be, Endrin Master Scuba Steve runs out there with nothing but a duct tape and like a rivet gun, and he's like, I got it, I'm on top of it, don't worry about it, and jumps off the side of the boat during the storm, patches it up in about 5 minutes, and crawls back on, right? That's the level of action hero engineer that we're talking about here. It's that level of badassery that the Endrin Masters represent, right? Aggressive engineers mixed with action heroes. Now, the last option here in the core book is known as the SkyRigger, and really, these are Kharadron Overlords that own and operate personal ether engines, which look like giant balloons strapped to their backs, giving them the gift and power of flight. It's like a slower version of a personal jetpack, and SkyRiggers is a broad term that fills one of two roles in Kharadron Overlord societies. You could be an Endrin Rigger or a Sky Warden. Both of those are considered SkyRiggers. For the Endrin Riggers, these work for and assist the Endrin Master in their repairs. Because no matter how cool an Endrin Master is, they can't be everywhere at once, and so they have a team of support engineers that can act as a rapid response team to any damages that require the use of a personal jetpack to get to, right? If a place is just unreachable by an Endrin Master, or there's just too many things to cover all at once, he'll dispatch his personal team of support specialists to go out there and fix things with him. In contrast, the other type of Skyrigger is the Sky Wardens, who use their power of flight to act as a terrifying melee shock troop for the faction. They'll blast in super quick with their jetpacks and assault the prey with their sky pikes and just stab and mutilate, and then they'll just it's like hit and run tactics, which is not something normally associated with dwarves, but this is what their technology allows them to do. And whichever option you choose, the real notable thing about the Skyrigger as a archetype, so to speak, is the back-mounted ether engine. But I wanted to point out that this is a great example of the Kharadron Overlords as a faction, right? Because they just made a technology and they find the most pragmatic and military uses for it. The backpack itself is just a tool, but it represents itself as both, a means of repairing ships, its pragmatic use, and then also offensively with hit and run tactics as a military weapon. Now, like I said, those are all the options we get in the core book. However, recently, a subsidiary book has come out called, Champions of Order, and it added a new archetype to the Kharadron Overlords, and that is the Ether Navigator. And this is a hero that I did not expect to see, really, because within KO society, an Ether Navigator is an academic and scholar with a singular focus: the weather. Which makes absolute sense in a faction that is basically just skybound for the entirety of their existence. They never land their skyports, these mega cities in the sky. And so understanding the weather and the treacherous realms in the skies of each one of them makes perfect sense. And so from living storms to slipstreams, mountain passes hidden beneath clouds, there's a lot of danger from living up high. And so the Ether Navigator is a class of scientists and engineers that have become masters of understanding this unique environment. They know the winds of magic, the most stable sky routes, and all this kind of stuff, and of course, traditional weather. In fact, they have such knowledge of the environment and the weather that it's essentially at their command. They insist there's no magic involved, it's just straight science, but their technology is so advanced that it's essentially indistinguishable from a wizard who can command lightning and things like that. And so those are the four archetypes or kinds of classes that you can play as. And so I want to kind of step back a bit and say, what does a Kharadron Overlord character bring to a binding, or a party, so to speak? Well, certainly, if you're kind of going with a very lore-focused character, skills in bartering and mercantile and that kind of stuff is fantastic. Depending on the kind of adventure that you and your party are on, a knowledge of sky routes is very interesting. But really, let's be honest, the most defining feature here is technology, just flat out. In fact, this is going to be an incredibly important point for any potential Kharadron Overlord player, because they have their own gear section in the core book that has to be maintained and upgraded, and ammo can run out for special weapons, and new tools need to be developed, and so on. And so they really can be this Swiss Army knife. We mentioned this as well with the Fire Slayers, because they can change their runes out, but with Kharadron Overlords, it's a resource management game that they get to play on their own, but in a way it contributes to what the party can do. Obviously, we're going to go through a pre-generated character here that's very offensively focused, but tools and those kinds of things can be used as a way to buff the rest of the party as well. If there is a problem, the Kharadron Overlords can make a tool for it. Even if that tool, generally speaking, happens to be an ether shot rifle upgraded with rapid fire capabilities. Honestly, there's a lot of things that a gun can't solve in the mortal realms when it comes to the kind of problems that your soul binding will encounter. It's honestly hard to chat about, exactly what they offer a binding, because they have so many potential build options compared to the majority of races. Like every single one of the heroes that we talked about can be outfitted with technology that solves particular problems. And they all have backgrounds that focus on different aspects of their culture. Like the Ether Chemist would have a great amount of insight into the landscape of the realms and the resources therein, and a great mind for science and technology, whereas the Ether Navigator could be fantastic when it comes to like a wizard stand-in, but he's using raw technology and what that can do for the party. So this is one where if you are interested in becoming a Kharadron Overlord character, for your playthrough, I would spend a great deal of time really reading and learning about the nuts and bolts of what makes this faction work in Soulbound, because you're going to have to spend a lot of time managing your gear, doing endeavors, which is kind of the long-term quest things to upgrade and repair things. It's going to be a lot more work than some other characters have to do. However, the pro and con there, that's the con. The pro is that you can kind of do whatever you want. Like, you can add so much to your faction. You could be a flying, aggressive, melee-focused beast. You could be a ranged support specialist. You could be someone who just bolsters the rest of the party by fixing things and creating new solutions for your problems on the fly. There's just a lot of ways that this can go. Keep in mind that as Duarden, their racial ability, all of these guys get 2 wounds, like an additional 2 wounds from character creation. So no matter what, you can actually be a fairly good tank just by sheer virtue of just you're stout. You can just take more damage than others. So certainly don't think of these as strictly ranged glass cannon type characters. They can do quite a bit. They can get in there, be a mid-battle, take a good punch on the face kind of thing and still deliver damage. And so, as I said at the beginning of the video, we're now going to cut over to talking about a pre-made character. And now what we're going to do is head over and take a look at the actual profile. This is a pre-generated character that was made for GMs and new players and that kind of stuff for Soulbound. Again, to kind of put some of those concepts into context. So we'll head over here to the shared screen and we're looking at Malgra Daneson. This is a SkyRigger, or Endrin Rigger specifically. They kind of went the mechanical route of the Kharadron Overlords. So, age 85, love it. Young, dark brown hair. Let's see. Black hair, 4'8", 191 pounds. Barak Nar tattoo on the right shoulder. So that's a great way to add some little details to your character, right? Any kind of abnormality, maybe there's a scar or bruise or tattoo, any of those things, I love it. So in her setup, she's got 3 body, 3 mind, and 1 soul. And the way that they've kind of broken down her abilities is a great spread on the stuff that, you would expect from an engine rigger, which is, of course, a focus of awareness, because they want to know what's going on with their ship. Ballistic skill is fantastic, so this is a truly offensive character. They're going to be wielding that gun and taking it to the fight. So great shooting. I think, what does it actually go to? Goes up to good on the scaling chart, which is wonderful, honestly. And then the 2 training and 1 focus there is great. Crafting, 1 training and 1 focus. Now keep in mind, crafting is incredibly important if you're going to play as a Kharadron Overlord, because all of your equipment requires you to upgrade and repair and maintain and all this kind of stuff. So it's very interesting. I would just say, if you want to have a KO that is focused on being aggressive in combat, certainly investing in crafting would not be a wasted use of skill points, like for real. Beyond that, they've given dexterity and intuition and reflexes. Reflexes are wonderful because they just allow you to be more defensive. So definitely not a waste there either. Now, I'm going to skip the goals here because that's going to be, dependent upon your specific story arc that you're trying to do. For talents, of course, because they are Duarden, immediately gets +2 wounds, which is a great. I can't overstate how great that is to have +2 wounds. Engineers Guild member. You are a member of the Endrin Riggers Guild. You studied artifice and metalwork in one of the renowned engineering academies of the KO Skyports. You can take the engineering endeavor to forge etheric devices. So a lot of times it depends on how you want to do your KO player. They can be, you know, shopping for new weapons, or they can be designing and crafting their own. And so this is exactly what that allows them to do. Combat repairs. You may attempt to repair an ally's damaged armor in combat. And then basically it goes through the number you're trying to achieve when it comes to repairing things on the fly. So that's super cool. Not a lot of stuff breaks, at least from my experience, but it's good to have someone who can, in the field, keep the team going. And that's really how they contribute to a party in this sense when it comes to talent specifically. They have Demolition Expert. Through clever augmentation of explosive devices, shouted warnings, and sometimes sheer luck, you can protect your allies from your combustive carnage. When you use an explosive or weapon with the blast trait, you can choose a number of targets equal to your focus in crafting to be unaffected by the blast. Again, one more reason that crafting is important, because in my personal binding, we actually have a KO character built almost exactly like this, and they can drop some nukes, like just straight up. I don't know any other way to word it. It's just, you just nuke a region or an area of the map. So being able to say, you know, hey, what is this? You choose a number of targets equal to your focus in crafting. So this specific character will be able to only pick one ally and be like, hey, that guy's not going to get hurt. But if you dump a lot of focus into it, then things get a little more interesting. So that's a great ability, because that way you can let fly with all the guns and the bombs that you got and just kind of go nuts. They also have Savvy. You're adept at striking deals, haggling, and navigating the cutthroat world of business, as any good Kharadron should be. You have advantage on opposed tests when bargaining with merchants or brokering contracts. Additionally, if you attempt to bribe someone and fail in a bribe, they are less likely to take it poorly or report you and will likely brush it off. They just don't care. Quick reload. You are practiced at reloading cumbersome weapons. You ignore the reload trait on any weapons you use. So there's no wasting time and actions when it comes to the combat. You just boom, good to go. Scrolling down here, of course, this reflects your additional 2 wounds that you get. We have, when it comes to combat melee, you're average. That's fine, but really you want to be shooting. Shooting is where you're good, and different abilities and weapons and stuff can modify that in combat, absolutely. And then defense is also average, which is nothing, that's not bad at all, for real. So I like that quite a bit. Let's see, initiative 5, that can change here and there. Let's see, toughness 7. When it comes to your weapons, you have quite a few options available to you. They really decked out this character with all the stuff. Ethermatic Saw, get 3d6 rolls. This is going to be your melee weapon, and it has some special abilities: loud, rend, slashing, etheric, all those things. They'll more matter when it comes to like storytelling elements and that kind of stuff. The etheric grenade is the, what is it? No, it's the drill launcher is the one that's the nuke that my companion has used in the past, where the drill launcher, you're rolling 5 dice at it, plus 1 with a focus. It's 2 damage plus the number of successes, and it's etheric blast 2, loud, piercing, reload, 2-handed. It's just a mess. I mean, that thing is just unwieldy. It is essentially like carrying around your own mortar cannon, and there's nothing cooler than that. And they also have a rapid fire gun option. There's just a bunch of different weapon options they can choose from that are just really fantastic. And again, there's a right tool for the right job. In general, though, your rivet gun is going to be wonderful if you are fighting alongside your companions, whereas I would only use the drill launcher if you have a high crafting, so you can choose people not to be affected, or if there's no one else in the zone, so you can just let loose and just drop a whole bunch of bombs. So wonderful. Absolutely love it. And so, yeah, they have her all decked out with the weapons here and which arm they are. And then other gear, Lucky Charm, a chain with a broken shard of metal. All that's left from the first Ether Endrin I crafted. That's a great little sentimental thing. And of course, if you are playing as a KO, you get the Ether Rig, which is the entire setup you have. And it just kind of, it does this, it breaks it down so that you can keep track of your inventory a little easier, to be honest with you. So all of these things are included in your Ether Rig. So power is the thing they have to manage. It's a resource that's like, you know, how much power can I use to fuel this specific weapon? Because it would be a little broken if you were just like, you know, drill launcher all the time. It's like, no, you have to like reload and repower and that kind of stuff to keep your equipment going. And so that really is, if you can think of power, it's like how much energy can I emit in a game round before I have to reload and stuff like that. So for all of that, they come with all the fancy bits and bobs, you know, all the shiny weapons and stuff. But because of that, they do not come with much in the way of currency. So where a lot of characters have well over 100 drops, you know, to give them some coin in their pocket, these guys only start with 25. So you will be hungry for that coin as you go out exploring and stuff. And that's one of the things I didn't get when I first started playing with my binding. I didn't understand the impact of different currency levels when you start, because I was, I was playing Excelsior War Priest. I think I started with like $150 or something like that. It was something like that, maybe 100. But you know, money to me was like, meh, I don't care. I'll spend it all willy-nilly. But then the KO player in our group was like, how much is this quest paying? I need to know. So I thought that was really funny when I realized like, oh, you care because you're broke. I thought it was wonderful. So this is a good look at a typical SkyRigger, specifically Endrin Rigger, which are more mechanical, more repair focused rather than melee and assault. The weapons are absolutely wonderful. You just have to be really good about knowing when to use the right one. For example, when it comes to like the usage of power, our player that we have doesn't use the Ether Endrin to fly a whole lot. It really was focused on the drill launcher to wipe out some incredibly large hordes of Skaven and zombies. And basically, yeah, we just need to craft new weapons and replacement heads and that kind of stuff to be able to use that gear later on. So this is a good look at that, and we're going to go back to the main cam. So friends, I hope you enjoyed that video as kind of a good introduction to the Kharadron Overlords and how they fit into Soulbound. I would love to hear your thoughts. If you've made a custom character and designed your own lore behind them, leave in the comments down below, because I would love to read those things and continue the conversation there. Thank you all so much for watching and listening, and happy adventuring.